everyone. Welcome to the latest installment of MSP Business School. I'm Brian Doyle. With me as always today, I got my co-host Tim McNeil and Rob Rogers. What's shaking, boys?
Nothing much. Living the dream. You?
Come on, man. One of these weeks, I'm going to get a better answer out of you guys than living the dream. Nothing. Crickets over there.
I got nothing. It's cold and there's a lot of snow on the ground. That's my answer. I'm ready for it to be warm.
Now I'll make fun of you because you moved out of Connecticut, and over here we don't have much snow on the ground, and it's really not that bad outside.
Really?
No.
Yeah.
No. Oh
Yeah.
God, I still have the rink up. We're probably going to be skating tonight.
Well, there you go.
It is full-fledged winter. Yeah.
Well,
Yep.
That said, we have another Connecticut crony here on the call with us. I want to introduce to people. Some folks might recognize him. He's been on a few calls with me in the past, but Ken Fearnley is joining us today.
The man, the myth.
Hi guys.
And the myth, the legend, sometimes referred to as Ken F. But Ken, Ken is one of the folks that helped me bring VCIO Toolbox to life. His underlying platform has helped contribute to launching Sales Maturity, which you guys have heard us talk about on this podcast before as well. Ken is one of those entrepreneurial spirits with a mind that goes a million miles an hour and in 100 different directions with yet laser focus. So I'm pretty excited to have him on, and coincidentally, good friend of mine. We go back to the high school days, so it only took us 150 episodes to finally get him on this thing, but he's here with us now.
Hey,
Ken, you knew him back in high school?
Yeah.
Oh, I'm sorry, sir.
Yeah. And thanks for that intro, Brian. Now I'm really gonna have to step up my game and live up to that during this podcast. It's great to join you guys.
Part of the reason we asked Ken to join us today is he's in the process of launching his latest project, Cybrance, which is a risk management tool really geared to a lot of organizations out there. And, I asked him on because obviously we have some components of that within VCIO Toolbox too. And, we're going to talk a little bit about risk a little bit later today, but, really this conversation is going to be about life in IT, kind of expanding and thinking beyond just the things we do every day and thinking about how to get creative and find different ways to, approach business as we go out into the marketplace. So, Ken, we usually love to lead things off with the person that's joining us, just telling a little bit about themselves and give us a little bit about how they ended up in the crazy world of technology.
Sure. Yeah. I kind of had a little bit of a dotted path to where I am today, but I really started my journey in IT. I was a full-time firefighter for about 12 years. And I started selling t-shirts. I don't know if anybody knows a firefighter listening to the podcast, but firemen love t-shirts. Started selling them, realized I needed a website, taught myself how to code, build a website. And, a couple of years later, I decided that technology and business and the intersection of both was what I wanted to do. I would get more of an adrenaline rush from doing that. So
Then being a firefighter.
Yeah, I'm not kidding.
Okay.
That makes sense.
So, that's why I made my jump into a company. I started as like their first developer. I left as their VP of R&D. Absolutely loved it. And, been involved with a bunch of startups, took a company public, about 10 acquisitions, both on the buy and the sell side. And I've been involved with software for 25 years. So I love this stuff. Glad to talk with you guys. We all kind of share similar backgrounds to some degree. And, happy to talk third-party risk management.
So before we get into third-party risk management, I want to take this focus on adrenaline for a moment. Let's not shortcut that.
Yeah, I was
one of the biggest mysteries is somebody that knew Ken was.
You left out
this guy was one of the biggest adrenaline junkies I knew when we were young. Besides some of the shenanigans we did that I won't speak of on a show like this, when Ken left us and went out to Vegas for a while, and he got a job at Bungee USA doing bungee jumping every day.
Yeah.
So this is a guy that bungee jumped, became a firefighter, told us there wasn't enough action in the small town we grew up in and wanted to go to New York City, and then somehow became, of all things, a coder, right? So, for me, as somebody that knew Ken for a long time, it was crazy to think that he can temper down his adrenaline, but I can totally appreciate where he's coming from. The opportunity to build something and then slay the dragon of a problem with software, there is something to be said for that and the adrenaline that comes out of it. Just like us sales guys know selling something Bring
Yeah.
some adrenaline, right?
Bring some,
Yeah,
yep,
totally.
absolutely.
I get it.
I mean,
I just-
technology is my
yeah.
medium that I used to paint with, and that's how I phrase it. I love the business side. I love taking technology and getting it to a point where it's profitable. But in terms of adrenaline, yeah, you're right. I did do some pretty cool things in my past. I've got a bunch of other stories. Probably could take up the whole podcast, but you do these things. You check the box. You skydive. You swim with sharks. You do whatever. And that becomes your normal, right? So, my wife's always like, geez, I did this and whatever, and the thing caught on fire, and you just threw a bucket of water on you, and you kept eating your sandwich. And it's kind of how I've developed. But I will say that software companies, you can never figure out what's coming next. There's always something coming from left field. You got to be on your toes. You got to react quick, stay calm, and I think all the craziness in my life has prepared me for that, especially when there's like, a server problem at 3 a.m. on Christmas Eve. You could either destroy your holiday or just kind of be laser focused, take care of what needs to be done, and don't let people see that there's a problem. So,
and I think the community you're talking today knows exactly what
of
that's
course,
all about. I mean, it is just crisis manage. I've got people that say, man, how do you handle doing so many different things and managing so many crises at once? And I'm like, because that's what I get paid for. That's all it's ever really been is, how do you manage the things that are going to come at you, in the world of MSP?
Yeah.
We wouldn't have jobs if we didn't have problems.
Yeah, exactly.
Absolutely. Yeah, we had a couple jobs back. I was a CIO, and we had a number of customers, and one of them got crypto locked in the middle of the night. They called our IT group, who kind of jumped on the phone, but it was the Wednesday before Black Friday. Big retailer, they sold shoes, sneakers, and all sorts of sporting goods. They're all ramping up for Black Friday, and here you go on Wednesday, bang. That was starting at like 2-3 a.m. until probably about 2 p.m. the next day to completely rebuild an environment, get them back up and going, get everything connected. And they might have lost something, but save their Black Friday. And like you said, Brian, you got to jump in quick and kind of get shit done.
Wow, that's amazing.
Bad day. It's a bad day.
I'd agree. That
Bad
is an
timing.
adrenaline pump.
Yeah.
Horrible
Yeah.
timing.
That's usually when these things happen. Target your target and hit them when it's going to hurt the most, right?
Yeah.
Maybe they'll pay the
Yeah.
most, but if you can stave it off, that's awesome. Well,
Yeah.
Ken, I know you've had entrepreneurial experience. I know you've also worked in, the big belly of the beast type companies, at leading there. What drives kind of the creativity for you today, and what, tell us a little bit more about what you're working on right now.
Yeah, I'm happy to. I'm working on a product in a company called Cybrance. We've got the Cybrance 360 platform, which includes enterprise GRC, third-party risk management. There's even a cyber incident response management module, with more modules to come. The platform's really around cyber compliance and risk management. We've got a number of modules that'll help different niches that are out there, different kind of corporate focused entities, college, universities, consultancies, large Fortune 500 companies with their own dedicated, IT, security, compliance, risk management groups where they just need some tools and support. So we saw a need in the marketplace, had the software and the know-how and the team behind it to put something out there that, we see as having a real possibility of gaining some significant market share. Then the nice thing is, the platform is very near and dear to my heart because it's really leveraging some software that I had developed about 15 years ago. At least the genesis of it was 15 years ago. I wrote a master's thesis on a low-code approach to developing software with the intent of developing software where the number of bugs would be significantly smaller and the rate at which you could develop software would be very fast. So I went through all that, defended my thesis, decided at one point to actually write the engine that would allow this low-code platform to kind of come to life. Developed an application on top of it, ended up licensing that to a company that did innovation management. A couple other companies along the way have used the technology, and right now Cybrance is using it as well. So pretty happy about that. It's come to life. It's being leveraged. But the nice thing is it allows us to develop software very quickly, very securely, with a high level of quality, which is, if y'all know anything about software companies, it's all how fast you can do it and don't get distracted by things that go wrong. So, we launched March 1st. We've got a lot of interest, talking to a lot of people, been flying around the country, talking to different contacts and potential customers, and, excited where things go.
Well,
And the marketplace is ripe for that conversation right now. We were talking about it actually in our podcast last week. We talked a little bit about how the human factor in security is the biggest challenge. And when you talk about the human factor, besides the training side of it, it's how do you deliver policy? How do you make sure that you're actually following up and maintaining on compliance? How do you make sure that when something hasn't been reviewed, you're able to track, tickle that person and kind of get them to know it's time to, review that status. There's a lot of moving pieces in everybody's infrastructure. And then when you start looking at all the moving pieces that are in an infrastructure that are being recorded and measured, and then having to sit on top of that and go, how do we make sure that we're looking at everything and reviewing it appropriately and not missing things that go through the cracks? It can get chaotic, but there's a lot of legislation being pushed. We know here in Connecticut, we've talked about that in the past. Connecticut, Utah, and Ohio were 3 states that kind of kicked it off. We're seeing new privacy laws going in everywhere.
Yep.
Yeah,
And,
I actually just heard Colorado as well.
Yep. And we just talked about, how the White House is now issuing, their cyber guidance as well, and starting to put out statements at that level. The education to the marketplace about cyber is real and getting heard. And now it's really, how do we measure and how do we build and how do we control all that stuff? And I think that's where for end user businesses, something like Cybrance can be a real help. It gets rid of the spreadsheets. It helps automate some of the process and really make sure that, a customer can stay up to date with these things and be able to report on them when called to the carpet. Yeah.
Well, we know that the security landscape is fragmented. A lot of tools are being used today. It's our hope that in the future we can start helping companies reduce the number of tools that are dependent on it by offering different capabilities. That's one thing. We're also, keenly aware of how your 360 partner and supplier and vendor ecosystem is just expanding by leaps and bounds nowadays. I heard the other day there was a 30% year-over-year growth in terms of how big your ecosystem's getting. And now that you need to consider not only your suppliers, security posture and where they're at, but their partners, their network. It's almost an infinite loop of getting down to, enrolling everything up without tools and things that make it easy to collect and see where you are. You're fighting an uphill battle. So I know we've all been involved with MSPs, MSSPs. They've got tons of tools being used, but the IT groups within corporate America sometimes face very similar challenges. An MSP will have multiple number of accounts or customers, whereas a large company, take for instance, like Pfizer or J&J or those big companies, they've got hundreds of business units, separate entities, corporate entities, that at the corporate level, you need to understand where their security postures are, where they're sitting at compliance wise. But every one of those companies has a massive ecosystem. And and on the corporate side, there's not as many tools that can really help kind of provide that visibility. And something that's easy to use, low training, easy to onboard. Just trying to understand all the aspects of what's going to help corporate IT groups and consultancies. So hope I'm not rambling. I'm just
no, I mean, look, the concept of how vast this opportunity really is, when you talked about it, slightly there, the MSP, MSSP community, they are in essence managing a large enterprise organization. Those different business units are the customers they're working on. And they really need to have a good understanding. One of the interesting things we uncovered at VCIO Toolbox as more and more people were using the business canvas model was how many of them were finding vendors that sensitive information was being shared with. that they had no idea if they were doing security awareness training, any social engineering experiments were occurring, and certainly they hadn't done a vendor assessment. And they're starting to see that their cyber liability insurance companies are starting to ask them questions about those that they manage to make sure the exposure doesn't go downstream. So
Yeah,
it's going to be
I'd say that an
interesting
MSP
few
has
years.
a harder job than a corporate IT group, right? Because an MSP has, if they've got 50 customers, all 50 have different policies, management, politics.
100%.
At least in corporate America, you've got, in theory, one way of doing things, one way to measure compliance, but
I question that theory.
Yeah, well,
on the other
in
side,
theory.
where the MSP wins a little bit is they can dictate a little better than you can in corporate, because there's less bureaucracy and they're usually dictating because the receiver has nothing. And
Right.
like the old man in a drought in the desert, everything looks like water, right? So they'll take anything.
Right.
Yeah. Huh. Yeah. So when you're dealing with more of the enterprise space, you obviously mentioned some really large companies. I mean, can you give me an example of like what is the ideal size for Cybrance? I mean, are we talking X amount of people on as a part of an IT team, X amount of companies within a company? Like what does that look like?
It's kind of early. When you're launching a company, you want to be opportunistic and fluid in terms of who you'll take as a client. But if I had to define target demographic, I'd say 20 to 100 million in revenue. Probably 10 to 20 person IT staff with one or two people focusing on security. Not massive, not the Johnson and Johnsons. Not that size. I was just trying to give an example of that spider web of a 360 ecosystem, but more, Fortune 1000, depending on where you draw the line.
Makes sense.
Yeah.
Cool. Very cool.
So, I know we're getting near the end of our time. Okay, maybe we can talk a little bit, about, you talked about incident response very quickly. One of the things that I think people don't think enough about in incident response are who are all the people that they need to communicate with when a problem occurs.
Right.
And I know one of the things that your system is going to solve for is, kind of how to get that message out. But, when we take a step back, it's really amazing to see the people that you are interconnected to what we do day to day that might be a stakeholder when a threat happens. So what are some of the things you're seeing around there in terms of maybe playbooks and communication plans?
Yeah, I mean, what we're seeing is a lot of companies don't have them. And what they have, it doesn't go deep enough, right? It's just skimming the surface. When you think about everything that needs to occur, especially if there's a sensitive breach, number one, let's make the assumption your legislation and your liability. But do you have contacts at some type of law enforcement at the federal level if you need to? You're going to release press releases. Well, who's going to write them? Who's going to deliver them? Is your social media management company going to be involved? Is your marketing team going to be involved? You should probably have all the verbiage of your communications pre-approved. If you're in the financial sector, you've got a huge compliance aspect around anything you put out there in terms of writing. If you're a public company, likewise, documenting all your stakeholders, documenting all your third parties that you would bring in, and certainly having outside technical teams that you already have a relationship with, already have an MSA, so you can quickly involve them in anything that might happen. On top of that is, what's your plan to kind of collect all the information? You're going to want to track, as you move from, kind of detection to more of a remediation or lessons learned phase. There's a lot of things that happen between there. Every incident is different. And, and if you haven't done like a tabletop exercise or at least informal walking through your process, I will say with 100% certainty, it never goes as smoothly as your planning exercise. There's always a gotcha. There's always something you hadn't planned on. So at least getting out of the way some of the things and helping the team get comfortable with, let's call it 80% of what's going to happen in a real world scenario, is super valuable.
Yeah, it's wild. I mean, it's, when you think about some of the contacts, we think about the people we work with, we think about some of the people who surround us, but
Yep.
law enforcement, when are you going to have to bring the FBI into the mix if it's something large? Will you have to engage bodies like CIS to really come in and help you do the forensics on it? It can be very interesting. It's not as straightforward as you said, but at the end of the day, the more data you can collect and the better organized it is, the easier it's going to be to communicate those things out. But also, if you need to make a claim and to keep yourself in business with the insurance companies, the more you can document, the more you can quickly give to them and share with them, the easier things are as you make that claims process go through as well.
And you might see, if you've got cyber liability, or even if you don't and you're involved in your insurance company, they may take over. If they're going to pay the claim, they may want to own, the incident from where it is until fruition, especially if there's going to be damages or downstream liability impact, right? So
yeah, that happens.
You may lose control almost depending on the incident,
Oh,
Yeah, you're
Wow, I
there
didn't
as a
even consider
side by
that.
side.
yeah.
Yeah, you're there as a side by side engage, person to engage with. They want to know the history. They want you to be able to show them the direction. But there does reach a point, and it's good for the provider too. You want to step away at some point too, because you could potentially, if you're not trained right, you could potentially only make things worse.
Right.
So,
God,
well,
crazy.
I think Rob, you're telling us we're getting near the end of our time.
I am, but it's coming about that time, fellas. Ken, appreciate you being on here today. For anybody that's looking to get in touch with Ken, we will be including his LinkedIn profile with the podcast. Also, this episode will be up on mspbusinessschool.com and anywhere you get your podcasts, to include YouTube. So please jump in there, like, subscribe, ask any questions. We'd love to answer any questions on there as well. Brian, Ken, Tim, any parting thoughts before we break away?
It was great being on. Thanks for having me. And I enjoy listening when I'm, driving the car or got a little free time. So keep it up, guys.
Yeah,
that was great.
Appreciate you joining us today, Ken.
Yeah.
When was the last time you jumped? Did your bungee jumping or something?
It's been a while for bungee jump, but I skydived 2 years ago. So.
You know what? Forget it.
Well, you know what, Rob? You shouldn't look at that like it's impressive. How many times you jump out of a plane?
40, but that was when I was a young guy.
Yeah,
young guy.
Yeah. I would argue he didn't do that for fun necessarily.
Yeah.
He might have been ordered.
All right, everyone. Well, thank you so much, and we'll see you all next week.
All right, take care.
Thanks, guys. Take care. Bye-bye.